Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to the show and welcome to another very exciting episode in our Audible login series. I hope you guys are having a lot of fun coding out there. And before we start today, just wanted to say thank you to everyone that left a comment on one of the previous videos regarding what video series I should be building in my next tutorial. So a lot of good ideas and interesting suggestions, and now I just have to kind of sit down and hit the record button and start building out the application. So that's going to be interesting, and hopefully within the next week or two, we'll see the very first episode for that. All right, with that being said, let's go ahead and begin the application or the video lesson for today. And we're going to be talking about NS user defaults, which have been now renamed as user defaults. And we're going to use that to remember whether or not the user is logged in. So the current application looks like this. Let me just run it to make sure everything's okay to start. In our application, we have our login component here. And if we keep swiping, we can actually dismiss the login by just hitting the login. And we get our home controller right behind that modal. And currently, we can't really tell whether or not the user has logged in or not. Everything is working around this is logged in method, which just returns a false or a true, depending on what you want to do with it. So what I want to do here is I want to show you guys how the completed application kind of looks like, and then we'll start the implementation of the behavior that we want. So this kind of completed application, I can sign out of the app. And if I close the app like this and relaunch it, it's going to launch with the login component as the very first view. If I log in right here, I'm logged in, kill the app, and bring it back, it'll remember that I logged in. So that's what we want to build for our video lesson today. So pretty exciting stuff. I wanted to show you guys how to also use enums to accomplish this task. So let's get started by looking at login controller, and the method that we are interested in modifying today is this finish logging in method. And right here, I actually want to do a couple of things. First, whenever a user is finished logging in, so for example, whenever they hit this login button here, I want to save inside of the user defaults whether or not this user has been logged in. And in this case, I want to save a value of true for a key of is logged in. So I'm just going to type it out right here, user defaults, standard for the standard defaults. And you can use this method called set, and we'll just punch in a value of true for a key of is logged in. So it's kind of a bad idea to specify the string or the key of the string like this, and I'll tell you guys how to fix this in just a few minutes. And here, whenever you set a value inside of user defaults, you actually have to call this method on user defaults called synchronize in order to save it to the device. Otherwise, the value doesn't get saved, and you're going to be wondering why the value isn't saved. So here we go. We get these two lines of code. All it does is that it saves a value of true inside of user defaults. So nothing too fancy yet. And we hit login. The value of true is now inside of the device, and we can look at it inside of main navigation controller. So remember this method that we've implemented called isLogin. We can now implement some true logic to return whether or not the user has actually signed in. And in other words, I will say return a value of user defaults standard, and you can use a bool right here. This will return a boolean for the key of is logged in. Okay, you can just remove the return false down there. And this method right here just gives you the value for whether or not the user is signed in. In the very beginning, if there is no value inside of this key right here, you just get a default value of false. You can kind of read the documentation on the right to see what it says. And here we go. You notice that the application launched and it automatically placed us into the state of the application which a user has logged in. So it looks like that. And yeah, that's not too fancy. And here we go. What do we want to do next? Well, inside of our completed application, we have this sign out button on the very top left. And I want to implement that inside of this view as well. And this view is currently called Home Controller. And because we're doing a lot of stuff in here, I want to dedicate some space here for Home Controller, this class right here, by creating a file just called Home Controller where I can put all of the logic for this class. So in other words, I will cut all this code out here, go here, paste it in here. You just have to import UI kit, otherwise it complains about not being able to find UI view controller. So here we are, we have our home controller, which is this view that you're seeing on the screen. If I run it, it'll just look exactly the same. Nothing has changed just yet. So the next thing we want to add to the application is this sign out button on the top left, which is relatively easy to do if you specify nav item left bar button item equals UI bar button item with this title constructor guy here. Just call these title of sign out, style of plain. Let's see if I can get that, and target of self with a selector of some method we'll call handle sign out. So I'm going to copy that method and remove that space. Function of handle sign out, and this will be called every time I hit this sign out button on the very top left, one of those sides. And let's see what we get in our controller here. So in controller we get sign out. Basically it is going to perform this handle sign out action upon clicking. And what is it that we want to do is the question. Well, we want to save the value of is logged in as false inside of our user defaults. So we specify user defaults standard set and use this boolean right here, boolean setter. And inside here we'll say false for key of is logged in. And just like before, we have to call .synchronize whenever we set a new value inside of our user defaults, user preferences. This is also commonly known as. And here we go. Let's see what this gives us. So I'm going to run the application again. I'm going to hit the sign out on the very top left of the app, and then it performs this bit of code. So I'm gonna run the application again. It should show me the login component. So right there we go. The login component is now the first view of our application because we are no longer signed in. So that's pretty good. If I go back to this login right here, so if I log in, it'll execute the code that saves me as a logged in user. And if I run the application again, what I notice sometimes is that the simulator doesn't exactly save the value properly sometimes. And if you just hit the run and you kill the application, sometimes I find that the synchronize doesn't actually happen. So be careful with that. What you can do is hit the stop button instead of just hitting the run, and hopefully your values will save properly. On the device itself, it works pretty well. Haven't seen too many bugs yet. Anyhow, what I want to do now is inside of Home Controller, if I hit the sign out button, I also want to present that login component. In other words, I can say present, and I need a controller of, let's see, login controller equals login controller, empty constructor, login controller here. Let's see, I want the actual instance, animation of true, and a completion block of nil. So what this is going to allow me to do is to just present the login component modally. Here we go. We get this guy right here, sign out, presents this guy. Go over here and log in, and we get our complete workflow for the application in which we can sign in and sign out, and the application kind of remembers the user's state of logged in or not. So that's pretty clean. Now I kind of want to talk about why it's not such a good idea to save these raw strings whenever we use this set value, right? So is logged in is here. If I copy this, hit the global find, we see a couple of different areas in which this is logged in string appears inside of the code. So if someone, or imagine if a new developer joins your team and decides to call this something like is signed in, perhaps. He wants to change the name of the string. And if someone does this, the entire mechanism for remembering whether or not the user is saved is kind of corrupted now. It's in a bad state because sometimes it's looking for this is signed in key, and sometimes it's saving it as a is logged in key. So it's very important to kind of get that straight. And to make your code very perhaps foolproof is to establish this string inside of a different class entirely. And the way I like doing this, perhaps is not the most efficient way, but it's the way I like to code up this this type of pattern, is just create a new file. And inside of this Swift file, I'll just call it UserDefaults plus helpers. So helpers, yeah, that sounds okay. In this class, I'm going to use an extension on UserDefaults like this. And this class, its whole job is to help me save values to UserDefaults. And the first thing I want to establish is this function called setIsLoggedIn with a value which is of type boolean. And this is actually going to do this setting for me. If I go back to, let's see, the find guy up here, and let's take a look at this right here. I actually want to just copy this code, and I want to go to the helpers file and just paste it in here. So basically, I want to execute these two lines, but on the actual UserDefaults instance itself. In other words, I can just call set and synchronize, and I will be okay. So here is one of the 3 places which is logged in is found. And if I go back here, I can find inside of this main navigation controller file right here, I find this method is also calling this raw string of is logged in. And it's basically figuring out what the Boolean value is. In other words, I can go back to the extension file and just simply create this function called is logged in. And this will return me that Boolean value like that. And if you just specify bool for a key of is logged in, you should be okay. I believe you need to return this instead. And that's how we get our is logged in from the UserDefaults. So now with these two methods in place and behaving just the way we want, we can go back to all of the places where is logged in appears and just call these two methods. In other words, let's go to main navigation controller, and instead of this line right here, I'll just return UserDefaults standard. If I build, I can get the autocomplete of is logged in, and now I can just remove this method entirely, which means that I no longer see the raw string of is logged in, and I hopefully will be able to just sign out like that, and then log back in. And if I am still logged in, I should see the home controller as my very first controller. And there we go. We see that I'm still logged in. And this method is just calling this extension file right here. And now let's see, where else am I calling this value here? If I go back up to the find, we're calling this setter right here. So instead, let's do this. UserDefaults, standard set. Set is logged in with a value of false. And basically this line right here replaces these two lines down here. So I just remove that and we get something that's much cleaner. If I copy this whole line and go to logging controller, every time we hit the finish logging in button, we can simply call, let's see, this right here, and this value is actually true for the logged in Boolean value. And we can just remove those two lines of code, and we've reduced the amount of lines of code, and also we've introduced a safer way to access this logged in string. So that's a couple of improvements to the code, which is important, and everything works, or everything should work according to whatever logic we established in the first place. So we logged out, and now we're logging back in, and we just logged in, launching the application one more time. We should see the home controller as our very first controller. So the reason why I don't is because this value right here needs to actually take in this value inside of the UserDefaults method. So value and value. Previously, the true wasn't being sent in. So let's see if this works. Go here, and log in. So we should be logged in now. Run the application one more time. Hopefully it works. Okay, and yes, so finally we are logged in. So that's good. All right. And as a kind of bonus to this video, I want to show you guys how to make this even safer if you guys are interested. So the reason why I think this is still a little unsafe is because isLoggedIn appears twice inside of this file. If someone decides to change this to perhaps a lowercase I, the entire mechanism kind of breaks down on you. So what is the safer way of approaching this type of problem? Well, one way to do this is to use an enum like this, an enumeration in Swift, and you can call this UserDefaults keys and call it or specify it with a type of string. And inside the first case, you can say is logged in, and this will give you one enum value, which is a string. You can use that inside of here by specifying UserDefaults keys.isLoggedIn.raw value. The raw value gives you the actual string from this enum, and you can just copy this and paste that in there. And if you run the application again, everything should behave the exact same way as it did previously. Okay, and now launching the application, everything works like it just did before. In other words, we can hit sign out up here, and we can relaunch the application. Upon loading the app, we should see the login guide, the component, like this. And signing in, we will restart the application one more time. We'll see the home controller as our very first view of the application. So that's how UserDefaults works, and including an enum inside of the defaults will definitely help you make sure your strings stay nice and safe. Okay, that's it for today. I hope you guys learned a little bit more about UserDefaults and how to use this mechanism to save whether or not your user is logged in, as well as other interesting properties that belong to your user. Anyhow, make sure to like the video if you enjoyed today's content. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. The code for today's project is definitely available in the description below. Hopefully you can find a link. Make sure to download the code as well if you need some help figuring out whether or not your code is working. That's about it for today. Hope you guys keep on coding, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.